Welcome back to the In Chamber. I'm your host, Tom Schumann. Adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs, are potentially traumatic events that occur at a young age and can impact people throughout their lives in so many ways. The Centers for Disease Control writes this about preventing ACEs, if indeed that can be done. It says, working together, we can help create neighborhoods, communities, and a world in which every child can thrive. Now, we're not going to have an in-depth medical conversation today. I don't want to go off track there, but the correlation is that our guest has taken what I'll call a challenging childhood experience growing up in a housing project in Terre Haute, and he's driven by that to help others. It's a story of entrepreneurship, clean energy, neighborhood revitalization, and much more. AJ Patton, managing partner and CEO of 548 Capital. Welcome to the In Chamber.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you for the nice introduction.
Absolutely. AJ, the name of your company, 548 Capital, it ties in a bit to my introduction. Why did you choose that name?
Yeah, absolutely. So as you kind of spoke to indirectly, in 1999, my mother received a $400 gas bill. She was making $10 an hour. And so, unfortunately, our gas got shut off. We had a hole in the roof we couldn't fix, and we were leaking gas. And so our utility bills got out of hand. And unfortunately, our gas got shut off for until about 6 to 8-ish months until we got caught up on the bills. And so we had to boil water to take a bath. And so fast forward through business school and working at an investment fund, I don't care what happens to you the rest of your life, that sticks with you. That's a part of your story and your DNA moving forward. And so I wanted to start a firm that addressed the issues of high utility bills and sustainable housing and renewable energy, empowering affordable and workforce housing. And so I started 548 Capital and 548 Development. 548 is the unit number in the projects that I grew up. And I wanted to essentially use the number 548 and that unit number as kind of the core of the mission. Everything we do will impact the types of families that come from those types of situations and scenarios. And so that is the reason for that number.
Sounds like daily inspiration, if any is needed, but a daily reminder.
Yeah.
AJ, talk about growing up in Terre Haute during that time. I mean, you mentioned that certain circumstance, but you grew up there. You went to school at Indiana State. We'll get back to Terre Haute a little bit later, but talk about growing up there.
Terre Haute. You know what? I don't get asked enough about Terre Haute. I realize that anytime you grow up in a relatively small town, it's got its ups and its downs. It's got some privileges. I think any kind of small town that used to have the visions of grandeur from the old 50s and 60s and 70s, where it was, kind of the big deal. And then you show up 20, 30 years later and the steel mills are closed and the factories are closed and it's a bit of a graveyard of manufacturing. Those tend to be really tough towns, right? And so there's a lot of tough people there. They've got tough stories. They love family. They're really invested in kind of community in a lot of different ways. And so it's a tough town. Loved it. There's a bit of privilege there because now I live in Chicago. And what I realized that my privilege in Terre Haute is that, and this is a privilege that rural communities have in general, is that what I see here in Chicago is that everyone's so segregated. The schools are segregated, the churches are segregated, the grocery stores are segregated. Well, Terre Haute, black, white, rich, poor, there was 2 high schools. There was one football team. There was one basketball, So, you kind of, I grew up in public housing unit 548. I was a mile away from doctors' mansions. And that would never happen in Chicago. The projects aren't close to mansions. That's just not how it works. And I realized once that I became adult and started to travel, that I had privilege where there were people from other ends of the spectrum who had no clue about the other people. The poor people had no clue that the rich people were okay. Some of them were. And the rich people had no clue that the poor people were just working, trying to catch a break. And I realized that I was privileged to have known and grown up with everyone. It had its challenges, there's its problems, whatever, right? But it was, that was privileged to grow up in Terre Haute.
AJ, you mentioned briefly the kind of the goals of 548, but dig into it a little bit more, how it involves housing, real estate, energy efficiency. Talk about when you were able to start that effort and how things are going with that.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. So I was working for a firm called Equities First. I was an international firm based out of Hong Kong. They had an office in Chicago, and I kind of, due to some really, I worked my butt off and got a chance to be an executive fairly young, and was the head of U.S. investments. And so every deal in the U.S. that came in the door had to cross my desk, and they were guys pitching solar infrastructure as an investment strategy, which is kind of been the same as obviously infrastructure bond type of returns. And I just posed a very simple question to a couple of CEOs in a row. And I just said, hey, you guys are building solar farms and selling all the energy to Google and Target. All the energy and all the tax credits are going to these big players. Are you going to sell any energy to at a discount to low income families? And because I controlled the deal flow at the door, they all had to be very kind. And
you got some positive answers that way, huh?
They all kind of looked at me and said, no one's thought of that. No one's doing that. Or, hey, there's all these issues because low-income families live in multifamily housing, oftentimes that are owned by slumlords. And so you've got to get the slumlords to all come together and understand the value of discounted energy, or you've got to go and get individual families to subscribe to these utility solar programs. And there's an educational gap of understanding it and the value proposition, et cetera, et cetera. I said, cool. I said, I get it. I said, but what if I owned the real estate and the solar? And I just combined them. I built the solar and the housing and sold the energy exclusively to the families in that real estate portfolio. And the guy said, Jaron, I remember him to this day, it's 7-8 years ago. He said, whoever does that's going to change the market forever. And so, like any good kid from Terre Haute that goes to Chicago and gets their fancy executive job and finally makes it, I quit my job. Like I can remember my family's face to this day. I quit my job.
So the ultimate startup story. Walking away from a great job and going to build and grow your idea.
That's it. I quit my job and I said, where better to start than Chicago? It's got this inventory. It's got these communities that have been disinvested for decades, 4 or 5 decades at this point. And I said, well, I'll go to the south and west sides of Chicago where most people won't even want to walk through. I'll go there and I'll buy all the vacant buildings that I can. I'll renovate them, make them energy efficient, and I'll power them with solar. And then I'll lease them back out at an affordable rate to working families. And that's exactly what I did.
And the key was, I think, 2 words you just mentioned at the end of that: affordable rate. You weren't going to do this and go in and raise the cost and totally change the community. The idea was to support the people that were already there, right?
Amen. And so I think what happened behind that was what we looked at it from a financial modeling perspective was, historically in real estate, what you'll do is you'll buy a building, you'll put as little into it as possible and try to put people in there and raise the rents as high as possible. And you're just kind of playing with that equation of how little can I put in and how high can I raise the rent. And what we've done is we turned that strategy upside down and said, what if we invest a lot of capital into how efficiently the building runs, right? So that our utility bills in the hallways are near zero. The families, their bills are essentially cut. Our internal data says about 44%. The public number that I share is about 33%, right? So we try to outperform that public number. So if I can cut your bill almost in half, that's a great lived experience for you. And then if I take the utility bills for the common areas, your hallways, your stairwells, your basements, and all of that, If I take that down to zero, that lowers my operating costs of having that building, which oftentimes building owners pass those expenses off to the tenant. Well, if mine are zero, well, that lessens my burden to jump and raise the rents on you. And so that in of itself was kind of a market shifter.
So AJ, you needed to raise money in the first place to be able to do this. Probably lots of money. So you and your partner Erica Johnson, who grew up with you, I believe, as I read in that same Terre Haute neighborhood. You're both Black. We've seen the numbers regarding investments in minority women-owned businesses. Talk about how the two of you were able to successfully raise this money for something that I would describe as non-traditional investment, non-traditional work that you're doing. How'd you go about it?
Well, one, you're being kind by saying non-traditional. You know, I went about it. I will say raising money is the hardest thing I've ever done in my career. The data that you're referring to about how difficult it is to raise capital as a minority business is probably, if anything, understated. I believe all of the money that's made in the market, less than 2% of it is managed by people of color and women combined. Stanford white paper put that out. And I can't explain to you how difficult it was. We had a great business model, executives with great experience, obviously, you know, a market shifting kind of idea and concept, and almost to a person, they all said no. And I'll tell you what, I'll give you the exclusive on a story that will probably come out next year. Is essentially, I ran out of money. I was funding the entire thing. And I ran so much out of money that I had to start driving Uber to keep the lights on. And so from 5 a.m. to 10 a.m., I drove Uber. And then from 10 a.m. to 5 p.m., I had my meetings. And then from 5 p.m. to 10 p.m., I got back and turned the Uber back on. And as God would have it, but it allowed me to keep pushing my business. It allowed me to keep working, keep the lights on, and not be homeless and you know, destitute or whatever.
But with 10 hours of Uber driving,
right, every day, right? And then funny thing happened with the Uber thing. I met so many good people. I had the sign in the car that said, "Invest in my," you know, I have a startup, ask me questions. I literally had a sign in the car that said, "I have a solar startup, ask me questions." And that led to me creating this crazy network of people that while I was working during the day, these other people were giving me their business cards, and I know this person and I know that person. This young guy's working hard. I respect it. And next thing you know, we had meetings from Connecticut to San Francisco, and we just kept at it. It took us probably 2 years to raise our first dollar. We raised first $1 million. Took me 2 years, and it was a long haul. And then now we've had some successes and been at it ever since.
So you said this story is going to come out. Is it going to be a movie? I mean, it sounds like a movie.
If I even shared just like stories of like movie stars in the Uber, the C-levels at Citigroup and C-levels at like 3 different Fortune 500 companies saying, "Who the heck are you with this solar startup turned whatever?" And next thing you know, it turned into like a thing. It just turned into a thing.
So how long of a time period or how many no's were there before it started to turn around with what you just described?
In the hundreds. I mean, we talked to every. Wow. We thought this was institutional grade, and so the data that you talked about at the top says that family offices and high net worth families historically don't invest in minority-owned businesses. So we said those guys aren't going to talk to us. We're not even going to talk to them. But the institutions, the public pension funds, those public plans, specifically in states that are a little more progressive, they have mandates to be inclusive to a certain percentile. So we just targeted the states that cared about inclusivity and said, we're going to go to California and in Connecticut and New York and in Illinois, and to say, okay, we're going to go to those public funds and the foundations that have big endowments and the universities that have big endowments, and we're to go to them and say, hey, I've got a strategy to renew the souls of cities with the power of renewable energy, create jobs, not gentrify, and create a return for your investors. Are you interested? Yes or no? And and that's what we pitched. And institutions have their own infrastructural issues of some of them are just too big to invest in little guys. Some of them are getting to the person to give you an answer is difficult, but that was our strategy. And then interestingly enough, we ended up meeting a wealth advisor who advised NBA players and exonerees and so forth. And they ended up being our anchor investor.
Excellent. You mentioned going in, wanting to purchase as many buildings as possible, make these changes. Can you give us a sense of how widespread your efforts been? How many projects you've done along those lines?
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, so we've got projects ranging from as small as a 6-unit building to as big as a 75. From the south side of Chicago to 79th Street to 89th Street to the west side of Roosevelt and St. Louis. We focused hyper on Chicago because one, those were markets that I had a good grasp on. They had inventory, the economics made sense to some degree. And so and also the state was friendly to renewable energy. And so it was understood that if you applied renewable energy in these particular markets, that the state was going to support it and not make it difficult. And so we felt like the stars kind of aligned for that particular market. And we've got projects as small as $500,000 to projects as small as $10 million.
So AJ, we've talked about, kind of the sustainable housing, the lower utility costs, but creating jobs is part of what you're trying to do, which is so important. Training people to work in this field. Talk about that aspect a little bit.
Now you're pulling at my heartstrings here. Clearly you've done some research. Thank you.
There, yeah.
You got me. So what I thought was the power and the true influence of what we were doing was creating affordable housing and doing it when lowering utility bills. What I realized is the influence was who got those jobs, who did the construction, who did the design, who was the engineer, who was the lawyer. And what I found in these communities was that there were talented professionals who never got an opportunity to work on a project. They never get asked to do the Magnificent Mile Hotel, but they've been architects for 30 years and never got a chance to be included. And so I called them all, almost to a man, and they've all been in my home. We've done 1 million meetings at this point. And I found that there is a coalition of architects, engineers, surveyors, you name it, who do high-end quality work. They just need to be included in a larger scale project. And so we cherry picked them and just said, look, you come here, let's go do something special for these communities that need it. And it ended up becoming this like coalition of just all of these contractors. I mean, down to workforce training programs and solar installation, the electrical training program. There's like 19 and 20-year-old young guys on the job site learning how to become electricians. I love showing it off. I love, I punch the guys in their chest. I always pick on the guys. I love it. And to me, that's the value proposition of what we're doing. And I did not realize it until we had the groundbreaking, and there were 14 minority and women-owned businesses that got contracts on one project. And they all stood behind me as I made my as I made my final speech before the project. And I got emotional. I did, because what I realized is these were neighborhoods that hadn't seen major investment in 40 years. That the project we done, a Terre Haute kid did a project, the largest private project in the south side of Chicago in multiple decades.
And you're changing individual lives with what you talked about, the 19 and 20-year-olds who training to become electricians. That's what it's all about, isn't it?
To a person. And so it was pretty special. And it's been, and now I've realized there it lies, right? there's the opportunity. Though that job creation is the thing. That's the stick.
So AJ, I became aware of your story earlier this year when I read when you were back in Terre Haute and talking to some communities, some business leaders, maybe about doing some similar work in your hometown. Are there some prospects there that you might be able to bring your efforts back to Indiana and Terre Haute?
That's the hope. So yeah, I mean, so I think that's one of the questions that we get, because my family's still there. My mom runs a food pantry out of Prince of Peace Baptist Church. My sisters are still work at the hospital. I mean, like that's still home in many regards. And so one of the questions I get is, that's great what you did there in Chicago. When are you going to bring it home? Right? It's just kind of the deal. And so we went home and had some conversations with the mayor and the president of the universities, and just said, where are we on this? Are these jobs needed? Are these the kind of jobs that we want? Do we believe, I don't go trying to sell people on climate change. I don't, it's at this point, it's a bit of a moot point, but more largely, I think bigger than that to some extent is the jobs. If I can't sell you on climate change, which I refuse to, can I get your attention with a good paying job? And towns like Terre Haute should never, ever, ever turn down 25 good jobs. And that's what we found, is the answer is yes. Now there's still infrastructure questions. There's state level questions, right? How friendly is the utility to renewable energy in that infrastructure, right? I think those will still be pretty hefty questions to be had. I think that will be a hurdle for us, is finding out where the utility and how much they'll be good partners to some extent, or lack thereof. But the intent's there. We've talked to the president of Ivy Tech, the president of Indiana State. We reached out to Rose Holman. The mayor and I've known the mayor since before he was elected, so he's a family friend. And I think his point was, which I think is a fair one, and I think is important, is let's do one or two projects and just show the value and get that buy-in, right?
Right.
And then once you get there, then you can kind of make a run at it. And I think part of what has happened is, you see, I always say that you see sustainable energy in these high-income communities, these coastal elites, if you will, and you rarely see them in kind of rural communities or kind of middle America, if you will. And I think that part of that is people aren't going and making the pitch in a real meaningful way and speaking the local language. And they're just writing whole communities, whole states off. And, I'm a part of those people that you just can't write off. We deserve to be included. Indiana deserves 10,000 new green jobs. And I think that's what what we're kicking the tires and going to chase down.
Well, the chamber has many great friends and allies in Terre Haute, from in your alma mater, Indiana State. President Deborah Curtis now doing a great job there the last few years. Paul Thrift is a former chamber board chairman. Thompson Thrift, great company that I'm sure you're familiar with.
Legendary company. That's a juggernaut at this point.
They are, and the thing about that, Paul's even a better person than he is a business leader. So we certainly hope that those conversations continue and come to fruition in Terre Haute. AJ, talk about the past year a little bit. We can't have any of these conversations without one pandemic-related question. What's that done to your efforts? How have you coped and adjusted over the past 12 months or so?
One, that's a layered question. Holy cow! I mean, because the pandemic, personally, professionally, spiritually, it has been, it's been heavy on all of us. And, I say that with having just got my first shot of the vaccine yesterday. It was very difficult. And I also personally had my first kid in the middle of the pandemic. So I had my son in December 18, and the pandemic happened, February, right? So
yeah, well, congratulations.
Thank you. Yes. So it was difficult on a professional level. Obviously, the banks essentially stopped lending for 5 months. which is part of the reason why there's such a construction craze going on right now. The cost of lumber went 3x, the cost of copper went 2x. So raw materials for construction just went nuts pretty much overnight. So your cost to do a project went up pretty high pretty quickly. I think on a personal level, I'm a people person. I need to touch the people. I'm an unapologetic hugger. I have to be there. I gotta, you're gonna see me in it. And so it was very difficult for me to be locked in the four walls at home, you know.
Those Zoom hugs don't quite get the job done, do
It
they?
doesn't, man. And I also I think there's something about the authenticity of a face-to-face conversation, a handshake, a lunch, a whiskey, where we can really get some business done and get comfortable with one another and move the needle. And I feel like it's going to go down as a bit of the lost year to a lot of people. Now, I've seen other people reinvent themselves and their businesses, and I'm someone close to us became a billionaire in this process, and other people have, they totally, have killed it. But there are the majority of people really just kind of tucked and hid for 10 months and figured out when it's safe to come back outside, and it was really difficult times.
I think that just my observation, the length of it has gone from at the beginning, okay, we're working remotely, we can still get things done, that's kind of cool, but missing those connections, and if you're in an office setting, that we call it the water cooler conversations or whatever, those things are really missed, and I think people are ready for that combination of what they can do moving forward, with certainly being back together in person to some extent.
I think so too. And I think just to give context, my son's 15 months old, and at the end of the month, it will be his first time going to Terre Haute.
Yeah.
He's never met his his great grandparents are still alive and doing well. He's got aunts, uncles, cousins he's never got a chance to hug and show that he can walk. And because the pandemic and the risk factor and new dad and being a conservative and all that, I had to hide. I didn't know what to do. I'm a new dad. I don't know what the heck to do. So I just shut the door.
Well, many years ago, AJ, I remember when my wife and I came home from the hospital with our daughter, our first child, and then the grandparents left, and we kind of looked at each other and said, "What are we supposed to do now?" It's all new. So and then all doom in a pandemic adds a whole nother layer on it. AJ, a few more things before we wrap up. As we said, you're living in Chicago, and let's forget about the pandemic for a second. What are some things you like to do when you're not working? What do you enjoy?
Yeah, I'm a workout junkie. Gym all the time. Avid golfer. And love, just a sports guy. Just love to play golf. Gym. I've got multiple foundations and nonprofits that we care about from a community perspective. My wife cares a lot about kind of the women empowerment inside the real estate industry. So she does a lot of stuff on that front. We have a foundation, the 548 Foundation, which does a lot of job training, educational programs that we care about. And just those are kind of the big things, because what I have found is that you could change, lives change when you got a job. You got a good paying job, your confidence is up, you can anchor a household. There's a lot you can do in a community. And so I tie a lot of some of the communal issues, whether they be violence or healthcare, a lot of that to, those often cross section with high unemployment. And so we've got to find ways to put people back to work and give them opportunities and meet them where they are. And so those are a couple of things that I'm really passionate about. Obviously, I think I mentioned that our family has a food pantry back in Terre Haute where we pass out free food. We partner with another group here on the west side of Chicago where we give away pallets, semi trucks of free food every month. And so I think it's my life's work to bridge communities, people that aren't historically speaking, that may be speaking past each other or over each other. My hope is to tie communities together, and whether that's the banking industry that doesn't want to talk to the low income communities, or Maybe that's some high income communities that want to write off some of the low income communities. I want to serve. I believe my purpose is to serve as the bridge and the connector of those worlds.
AJ, we end most of our conversations this year. We've been asking people what makes it a great day. I'm going to alter that a little bit for you, but along those same lines, and say, for you, what is most satisfying to you about the work that you're doing? And you just described some of the many foundations and food efforts, but at the end of it's still, I guess it's back to the end of the day. You think, if you stop, slow down, think about it, what's most satisfying to you?
There's been a couple moments. I think I think most satisfying, I think I'll go back to creating jobs. I think that matters. I will say, if my wife were on the line, she would tell you a story of her on a job site and seeing me there, and the person walks up and is looking to speak to the owner, and he's a subcontractor working for someone else, and his face when he realized it was me. It never crossed his mind that somebody that looked like me could do something this large scale. And the pride in this old man's face and everyone kind of around was just like, that's different. That's inspiring. And I got back in the car and she just said, she was getting ready to cry. She just couldn't believe that, just witnessing that in third party. And I think those are, imagery matters, right? Imagery matters. You can do what you see. I tell the story that I did not know a person that looked like me that wore a tie to work until I was 18 years old. To me, ties meant you were going to church or you're going to court.
Yeah.
And so for me to meet Dr. Salatha Willis and at 18 years old, and master's degree Tony Brewer wearing a tie and shoulders back, shaking with a firm hand and saying, young man, you can be something. That imagery allows people to project in the future. And so I am very, very well cognizant of the histrionics of what we're looking to accomplish and what that means to other people from an inspiration perspective, and then holding myself accountable on those levels.
AJ, you just stole my word. I was just getting ready to say, for me, and I'm sure for listeners today, this has been inspiring. Just congratulations on everything that you've done. You've achieved the work you're doing, and with, I'm confident, the promise of many more great things to come.
Tom, thanks. And from your mouth to God's ear, I appreciate it. My hope is to do it in Terre Haute. We're don't tell anybody this, but we're looking at projects in Indianapolis too. And I think come this fall, there'll be some really cool announcements coming out, and we're going to make a real good run at doing some good for home. And we, I get the calls from Terre Haute, Indy, and Evansville, and I've got an uncle in Evansville who won't put the horn down. We've got city councilmen
we'll welcome you. We'll welcome you in all those communities. How's that? Go.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
All right. Well, AJ Patton, 548 Capital, and all the great work you're doing. Again, we appreciate you joining us. A few things before we wrap up. We are just over 2 weeks away from the Chamber's 16th annual Best Places to Work in Indiana program, hybrid event this year, in person at the Indiana Convention Center, as well as virtual. You can get all the details at indianachamber.com. Quick reminder about the great work of two of our affiliate organizations, the Wellness Council of Indiana, playing such a crucial role in the mental health issues that are so prevalent today, also in communicating about vaccinations and all the important information regarding the pandemic. And then we have Work and Learn Indiana, formerly Indiana Internet, providing those internship and other career development opportunities. Again, we encourage you to take advantage of those organizations and work with them as needed. We thank you, as always, for listening to the In Chamber. We'll be back with our next episode in 2 weeks.